In the sprawling alien metropolis of Threxonia Prime, clinics for every manner of exotic, non-human creature dotted the streets. Zarnak Tolis Clinic stood out, perched atop a winding spiral of luminescent walkways that shone with the hues of the 7 moons. Beings of all forms scaled, feathered, amorphous, and crystalline clinked, slithered, and hovered along the sky bridges, seeking out treatments that only the great Zarnak could provide. His reputation extended far beyond the city and even beyond the sector. In the eyes of many, he was the definitive authority on alien medicine. For his part, Zarnak enjoyed his fame. It afforded him access to cutting-edge diagnostic arrays, rare healing compounds, and a lifestyle that few in his field could match. But there was another side to it, one less discussed. Zarnak's expertise also came with a cold pragmatism. He was selective about his patients. Resources, after all, were not infinite. Treatments for common species brought steady income. Rare or unknown creatures, on the other hand, required lengthy research and custom procedures that often ended in failure. Zarnak had no interest in tarnishing his perfect record. It was on one such ordinary afternoon, with the clinic humming along at its usual efficiency, that everything changed. The main entrance slid open with a hiss, and in stumbled something entirely unexpected. A YYRR. The creature's vast bulk barely fit through the door. The air seemed to vibrate with its labored breathing, each heave sending a shudder through the floor. Its 4 legs, thick as support columns, buckled slightly under its weight. Its immense eyes, glowing faintly gold, were clouded with pain. A deep gash ran along its chest, dripping a luminous violet fluid onto the clinic's pristine floor. The injury looked fresh and fatal. Behind the massive beast, a small figure appeared. Dr. Eliza Wren stepped into the doorway, her hands clutching an emergency medkit that seemed woefully inadequate for something of the YYRR's scale. She was tall by human standards, with a wiry frame honed by years of fieldwork. Her chestnut hair was pulled back into a tight ponytail, and her piercing blue eyes flicked from the creature to Zarnak, who had frozen at the sight of his uninvited patient. "Zarnak Toll," Eliza began, her voice steady. "This animal is in critical condition. I need your help." Zarnak's tendrils twitched in a rapid, almost agitated rhythm. "Dr. Wren, you should know better. I don't treat creatures like this." "You're a veterinarian," she retorted. "And this is an animal that's dying in front of us. What more do you need to know?" Zarnak bristled at her tone. "I treat creatures whose anatomy I've studied, whose biology I understand. A YYRR. That's no simple task. They're from the Garrick Expanse, a region I've never worked in. If I make even one mistake, I could accelerate its death rather than prolong its life. It would be irresponsible. It would be irresponsible not to try," Eliza shot back. "You've got equipment here that I can only dream of. Look at it." She gestured to the creature, now lying on its side, its sides heaving. "It's already dying. What do you have to lose?" "More than you realize," Zarnak said coldly. He turned his back, retreating toward the diagnostic station. "If you have any sense, you'll leave it to die in peace. At least that way, it won't suffer from botched treatment." Eliza stared after him, incredulous. The creature let out a low, heart-wrenching groan, its eyes dulling further. She tightened her grip on the medkit. The situation was worse than she'd thought. If Zarnak refused to act, the creature would be gone in minutes. She knelt beside the YYRR, her human hands trembling as they moved over its massive form. "Hey there," she murmured. "I don't know if you can understand me, but I'm here. I'll do what I can." Her voice softened, though she doubted it brought the creature much comfort. She wasn't even sure where to start. Its physiology was completely alien. The blood, if it could be called blood, glowed faintly, and the texture of its hide felt more like a flexible mineral than skin. But it was warm, and she could feel the faint pulse of life still clinging on. "Fine," she muttered under her breath, casting a glance at Zarnak, who remained resolutely at his workstation. If you won't help, I'll do it myself. She unzipped her kit, pulling out bandages and a set of sterilized tools. They seemed laughably small against the Ywerartar's colossal wound, but Eliza had worked in remote field stations on Earth, patching up everything from elephants to rhinos. She'd never seen anything like this creature, but she wasn't going to let that stop her. Eliza! Zarnak's voice came from across the room, cautious but unyielding. You're a terrestrial veterinarian. You have no idea what you're dealing with. This is dangerous. Reckless. Maybe, Eliza replied, not looking up from her work. But I'm not going to sit back and watch it die. I can't. With steady hands, she began cleaning the wound, ignoring the alien vet's frustrated sighs. She didn't know if her efforts would be enough, but she wasn't about to let that stop her. The creature's golden eyes flickered faintly, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw something in them, an intelligence, or maybe just a flicker of gratitude. She couldn't be sure. One thing was certain, though, she wasn't leaving without trying to save it. The Ywerartar's massive chest heaved slowly, its labored breaths rattling the walls of the clinic's examination bay. The wound in its side continued to ooze that strange violet fluid, and Eliza knew every second counted. Her heart raced as she dug through Zarnak's supply cabinets. The advanced tools and materials were so alien that their functions weren't immediately clear, but that didn't matter. She had to work with what she could understand, and right now that meant starting with basics: pressure, cleaning, stabilization. No matter how foreign the anatomy, those were universal. She found a pack of sterile bandages, though they were designed for smaller creatures and would barely cover a fraction of the Ywerartar's wound. Next to them sat canisters of powdered coagulants labeled with incomprehensible symbols. She grabbed a few, hoping the powders were meant to stop bleeding and not meant for something entirely unrelated like nutrition or disinfection. A half-open drawer held clamps and instruments that looked close enough to forceps, so she grabbed those too. With her arms full, she rushed back to the creature's side. Zarnak stood at the edge of the room, his arms crossed and his tendrils still twitching in disapproval. "You're wasting your time, human," he said, his voice sharp and cold. "That creature's physiology is entirely unknown to you. You might as well be using pebbles and twine." Eliza ignored him. She didn't have time for an argument. She knelt by the Ywerartar's side and began working. First, she gently dabbed at the wound, her fingers careful and steady. The beast twitched but did not pull away. The violet blood was warm to the touch, and as she applied pressure, she hoped the coagulant powder would act like the hemostatic agents she used back on Earth. She sprinkled the glowing powder over the injury, then began wrapping the bandages, overlapping them in layers to create at least some barrier against further blood loss. "You should have let me at least run a diagnostic scan first," Zarnak continued, though his tone was less venomous now. He seemed more intrigued than angry. "If you seal that wound incorrectly, you could cause a cascade failure in its vascular network. And if I wait for you to decide it's worth treating, it'll die." Eliza shot back without looking up. She applied a bit more coagulant, wincing as the creature let out a low groan. "You said yourself this thing isn't from around here. How do you know its blood vessels will collapse just from a bandage? Maybe the basics are what it needs." Zarnak fell silent, though she could feel his gaze fixed on her every move. The Ywerartar's breathing, once ragged, started to settle. Its enormous chest rose and fell in more even rhythms. The flow of glowing blood slowed. Eliza worked methodically, adjusting the pressure on the bandages, repositioning her hands to find where the pulse felt strongest, making sure the creature's airway remained clear. It wasn't just the tools or the techniques, it was the years of experience. The instincts honed from countless rescues, triages, and desperate treatments. "There," she said softly after a long moment. "That should hold for now. Just rest, big guy." She sat back on her heels and wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. Her shirt was damp with sweat, and her legs ached from kneeling so long, but she didn't care. The Ywerartar's glowing eyes flickered open briefly, and a low rumble emanated from its chest. It wasn't a growl, if anything. It sounded like a deep, resonant sigh of relief. Zarnak approached cautiously. He towered over her, his tendrils curling in indecision. "You may have bought it some time," he admitted grudgingly. "But that's all you've done. Without a deeper understanding of its biology dash. We can learn as we go," Eliza said, standing and brushing herself off. "Right now it's alive, and that means we have a chance. It means we have time." Zarnak studied her, his expression unreadable. His tendrils fell still, and for a moment he said nothing. Then, with a reluctant nod, he turned toward one of the wall-mounted scanners. "You have no idea how reckless this is," he muttered, though the edge in his voice had softened. "But since you're determined to be reckless, I suppose I can at least run a diagnostic now." "Good idea," Eliza said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Maybe you'll find something that'll actually help." She crossed her arms and looked back at the YYRR, whose breathing had slowed to a steady rhythm. The golden glow in its eyes was faint, but it was still there, still alive. That was enough for her for now. Eliza watched as Zarnak calibrated the diagnostic array. The alien vet's tendrils moved with practiced precision, keying in commands on the console's smooth surface. A soft hum filled the room as a pale green light swept over the YYRR's massive frame. Eliza stood by the beast's side, one hand resting on its thick, armored flank. She could feel the faint rise and fall of its breathing, still slow, still shallow, but steady. The beast's immense golden eyes fluttered open and fixed on her for a brief moment. That flicker of awareness, that dim spark of life, reminded her why she was here. Zarnak's screen displayed a swirling array of symbols, colors, and graphs. To Eliza, the alien script was incomprehensible, but Zarnak muttered quietly to himself as he interpreted the readout. "Incredible," he murmured after a moment, his voice tinged with both amazement and concern. "I was correct, this creature is not native to any world in this sector." "Then what's it doing here?" Eliza asked, stepping closer. She was careful not to disturb the machine, though she peered at the screen as if she could will herself to understand it. Zarnak straightened, crossing his arms. His normally vibrant green tendrils had dimmed to a thoughtful teal. YYRR are known only from the Garrick Expanse, a region of space outside the reach of Threxonia's usual traffic routes. They're revered as protectors of balance. It is said they guard certain ecosystems critical to entire planetary chains. To see one here so far from its home is troubling. Eliza frowned. Guard ecosystems? Like environmental caretakers. That's a simplistic way to put it. But yes, Zarnak said, his voice losing some of its usual condescension. They ensure the survival of certain keystone species. Without them, entire biospheres have collapsed. They are a rare, ancient, and highly intelligent species. If this one is here, something must have driven it away from its post. Something catastrophic. Eliza's gaze shifted back to the YYRR. Its golden eyes were half closed now, its breathing steady but faint. Despite its immense size, there was something vulnerable about it, an almost solemn grace. She reached down and touched its rough, mineral-like hide again. "You've seen them before, haven't you?" Zarnak hesitated. His tendrils twitched again, their teal hue darkening. "Not in person," he admitted. "I've only heard of them through research logs, historical accounts, a handful of second-hand sightings. No one ever brings one into a clinic like this. They're never injured. They're not supposed to be injured." "Well," Eliza said, "this one is." Zarnak looked away, as if the sight of the wounded creature was almost too much to bear. "If it left its home," he said softly, "if it was injured like this, it could mean—" He stopped, shaking his head. "I'm not certain, but I know that the YYRR is not just another animal. It's tied to something much larger than itself." Eliza took in his words. She knew the gravity of his voice meant something profound, but right now, The only thing that mattered was keeping the creature alive. Whatever bigger implications it held could wait. Do you think it can heal? Zarnak studied the diagnostic display again. His tendrils swayed as he processed the data. It's weak. Its cellular regeneration is slower than I'd expect for a creature of its stature. The wound you bandaged is holding, but the deeper trauma internal damage will take more time to repair. Eliza nodded. We've got time. For now, it's stable. We have time, Zarnak agreed, though there was an uneasy note in his voice. But if it doesn't recover, we may be facing consequences far beyond what either of us anticipated. As the YYRTAR settled into a fitful rest, Eliza remained by its side. She had always believed that every animal had a story to tell, an experience, a reason for being in the situation it found itself. Whatever had happened to this magnificent creature, what Eve? The YYRTAR's recovery was painstakingly slow, but progress was progress. Day by day, its breathing steadied and its golden eyes regained their glow. Eliza took every small improvement as a victory. She spent long hours at the creature's side, monitoring its pulse, reapplying fresh bandages, and carefully documenting what little she could understand of its anatomy. Her notes were a hodgepodge of Earth-based medical shorthand and alien terminology she'd picked up from Zarnak. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Zarnak, to Eliza's surprise, had started to show genuine interest in the treatment. After his initial reluctance, he began running additional scans and offering advice on how to apply the clinic's advanced technology. Though he never outright admitted it, Eliza could tell he had a growing respect for her determination. More than once, she caught him muttering about human stubbornness as he handed her another diagnostic tool. "You're determined to keep this thing alive," Zarnak said one evening, his tendrils swaying in contemplation as they hovered over the YYRTAR's still healing wound. "It deserves a chance," Eliza replied, wiping her hands on her coveralls. "I'm not just going to sit back and let it die. Not when we've come this far." Zarnak nodded slowly, his vibrant green tendrils tinged with a faint golden expression of cautious approval. "I admit, I didn't think you'd get this far. Most beings would have given up by now. Most beings haven't spent their lives wrestling injured elephants and setting broken wings in the middle of a jungle," Eliza said with a small smile. "You learn to stick with it, no matter how bad it looks." The YYRTAR made a low, rumbling sound, less a growl and more a deep, resonant hum. Eliza looked down at the creature's massive, glowing eyes. They seemed brighter than before, more alert. She reached out and rested a hand on its flank, feeling the strength returning to its enormous body. "It's going to make it, isn't it?" she asked quietly. Zarnak studied the latest scan results. "It's too early to say for certain, but, yes, I believe it has a real chance." Eliza let out a long breath. Relief washed over her like a tidal wave. "Good. That's all I need to hear." As the days turned into weeks, the YYRTAR grew stronger. It started to stand on its own, its massive legs no longer trembling under its weight. Its deep, mournful groans were replaced by the occasional hum, almost melodic in its tone. To Eliza, it felt like the creature was trying to communicate. She didn't know if that was true, but it gave her hope. And hope was all she needed. When the day came to release the YYRTAR, the clinic staff, human and alien alike, gathered in the wide, open courtyard outside the building. The beast stood tall, its golden eyes scanning the horizon. The wound on its chest had faded to a pale scar, and its movements were steady and strong. It let out a low, harmonious rumble that seemed to echo through the surrounding buildings, sending a shiver through Eliza. Felt like a farewell and a thank you. "I never thought I'd see one of these creatures in person, let alone help it recover," Zarnak said, his voice unusually soft. "You've done something remarkable, human." "Not just me," Eliza said. "We did this together." Zarnak's tendrils twitched in a gesture that might have been agreement. "You taught me something I hadn't considered. Perhaps the greatest mistake is to assume we can't help simply because we don't fully understand. Maybe, taking a chance is sometimes the right thing to do. Better late than never, Eliza said with a grin. The Wairatar turned its massive head toward them one last time, golden eyes gleaming. Then, with a powerful stride, it set off into the distance, moving with the grace and dignity of a creature restored. It was free, alive, and ready to return to whatever purpose had driven it here in the first place. Eliza watched it go, her heart swelling with pride and relief. She didn't know what would happen next, what challenges she might face on this alien world, but she knew one thing for certain. She'd made a difference, and in that moment that was all that mattered.